thank both Leonie and Scott for stepping up to volunteer. They're both, going to be great additions to the Charter Review Committee.
Yes. This does require a roll call vote.
Mr. Fitzgibbons,
Yes.
Mr. Columbotus,
Yes.
Mrs. Loesch,
Yes.
Mr. Rushton,
Yes.
Mr. Gallagher,
Yes.
Mr. George,
Yes.
Mr. Lindy,
Yes.
Mr. Chase,
Yes.
Mr. Souza.
Yes.
9 in favor, none against.
I'll entertain a motion to appoint Scott Pitta to this Charter Review Committee.
Make the
So
motion.
moved.
Second.
Second.
There's a motion and there's a second. Is there any discussion? Seeing none, this does require a roll call vote.
Mr. Souza,
Yes.
Mr. Chase,
Yes.
Mr. Lindy,
Yes.
Mr. George,
Yes.
Mr. Gallagher,
Yes.
Mr. Rushton,
Yes.
Mrs. Loesch,
Yes.
Mr. Columbotus,
Yes.
Mr. Fitzgibbons.
Yes.
9 in favor, none against.
We do not have any hearings this evening, nor do we have any licensed transactions, nor do we have any presentations. So I'll move right to the town manager's report and welcome Mr. Dutton to unmute himself for his report.
Thank you, Mr. President, and thanks for the reminder, because I'm sure nobody would want me muted for this. All right, I do have a few items tonight, but I'll go through them relatively quickly. The Mitchell School, not a whole lot to report on that other than what I already have on prior meeting, but the demo is notice to proceed was issued yesterday, June 1st. And we are anticipating that the job will be completed by August 10th. As I mentioned before, we've sent letters to what are referred to as the 300-foot abutters, so within 300 feet of the school's property line, and those went out a couple of weeks ago. So people should be well aware of where they can get more information. We're certainly happy to provide any additional information as we move along. We had a virtual design meeting with the MSBA last week. That went well. There are no significant issues from the MSBA side of things. The design architectural firm is finalizing the 60% construction documents, which go to the MSBA at the end of this week. Fortunately, it's just an estimate, but fortunately the estimates came in a little bit lower than the original estimates. So we are still tracking on budget, on time, on budget, if not a little quicker and a little less at this stage, but it's only this stage. 90% drawings will be completed and presented to the MSBA by August 28th, if all goes well. And then the 100% drawings will be completed in October, and it will go out to bid for award and notice to proceed construction in December. That's the targeted date, targeted month. So we are still looking at a July 2022 completion. And as I've mentioned before, the total appropriated budget is $80,600,000, $46,771,000 to be paid by the town's property owners, and $33,828,000 to be offset by contributions from the Massachusetts School Building Authority. The next meeting is scheduled for Monday, June 15th. Then there's 2 weeks after that, another meeting on Monday, June 29th, and then another scheduled for Monday, July 13th. And I think that's as far out as we went on those. The school proposals coming up to the Conservation Commission in a week or two. It also goes to the Zoning Board of Appeals in a few weeks, and then finally to the Planning Board in early or mid-July for final approval. And that is all on track. And I've mentioned obviously before, but anybody wanting all the information that you could possibly want on the school project should be online at www.bridgewaterschoolproject.com. So that project is so far moving along relatively well despite the challenges. So happy to answer any questions about that one.
Councilor Fitzgibbons?
Yeah, thank you. Mr. Dutton, I believe we've talked about a particular tree in that area that is a memorial tree for somebody that needs to be preserved. And I hope the demolition is not gonna, actually, let me put it this way. I expect the demolition will not destroy that tree and it will be preserved and kept for the new school when it is built. And it would be a tremendous loss to the community were it not. And then secondly, it sounds like everything's moving forward okay. We're still hitting all the state deadlines we're supposed to, right? There's no delay on our side. Whenever we have a date to meet, we've met it, and then we have to wait for the state to say, yes, you can go to the next state, correct?
That is correct.
Thank you.
All right.
Anybody else have any questions for the town manager regarding the Mitchell School update? Seeing none, we'll move on to COVID-19 and budget impact.
Thank you. Happy to report that we are down to about 32 total active cases as of today, and we are definitely seeing a trend down over the last 10 days or so. So what you see statewide and what you're getting reported statewide seems to be true with Bridgewater as well. That's good news. We have I mentioned last meeting, we've begun our planning process for the reopening of the buildings. As you know, the governor's orders relative to offices reopening are fairly stringent in terms of capacity and protections that are required. We are going to have a significant investment in additional equipment and supplies, plexiglass and so forth. We also will have additional specialized cleanings, which will be on the expensive side as well. The unfortunate thing is that virtually everybody in the state and almost everybody in the country probably at this point is looking for exactly the same supplies. And so that the supply chains there are, if not stressed, broken. Or if not broken, stressed, and our ability to get people back in the building will largely depend on our ability to get those supplies. But regardless, we do have critical employees dealing with things that can only be done in the building, and they are there for as long as they need to get those particular things done, and then they are out of the building. So, and I've mentioned this before. Just because the governor referred to it as reopening doesn't mean that we're reopening government. We've been fairly effectively serving our customers and our residents throughout this entire ordeal, and so I'm quite proud of that. In particular, the town clerk has had a hopping wedding business over the last several months, and that continues. But on the more serious note, less lighthearted note, we do have work to do, and we've kept at it. So we will be looking at trying to get the building open to the public. I'm not confident that that's going to be anytime soon, but that obviously is our goal, overarching goal. So that's just in terms of the town's buildings, the town's administrative buildings. Obviously, everything else, highway work, water, sewer work, council on aging goes on. But those town buildings that have administrative support are still not open to the public, and it may be a little bit of time before we can get those reopened. As for local businesses, reopening all the local businesses is a very high priority for us. They suffer similar constraints to offices, particularly for restaurants. At the point when the governor declares that the state has entered phase 2 of its reopening plan. All the licensees for on-premise consumption of alcohol may commence outdoor table service only, which means that if you own a owner of a liquor license and the governor says you can reopen, you have to serve food only at outdoor tables. There will be no service of food on the interior of the building. So we've sent out some survey information, some survey questions to restaurants so we can get a sense as to whether one, they have the ability to provide outdoor seating, and if not, certainly how we can be of any help on the town side. And the ABC, I should add, is very recently allowed establishments to serve outside of their otherwise licensed area, as long as they work with the individual towns to make sure that service is appropriate and feasible and done according to some of their other rules and regulations. So they've been actually surprisingly quite flexible and quite helpful in that regard. So our intent is to work closely with especially the restaurants, because that seems to be the most coming up, on the calendar quicker than others. And so we'll obviously work very quickly with those businesses to get them up and going as soon as possible, albeit outside for food service. So I will happy to if I've missed any of those businesses and they're listening tonight, they can reach out to town manager at bridgewaterma.org. Very simple, town manager at bridgewaterma.org to get any questions answered or to seek some guidance or assistance from my office or any of the other offices about. So that is in the works. Excuse me, just otherwise relative to COVID, as you know, the council had changed the time and the date of the election to Saturday, June 25th from 10 a.m. to 4 p.m. We had a citizen ask if those hours could be amended again to be, I believe, the normal time of 7 a.m. to 8 p.m. And the answer is at this point, no, because the election warrant has been published, and there would not be enough time to allow the council to go through that legislative process to change hours again. So I just wanted to make that clear. In terms of budget update, I think the good news, there's good news and bad news. The good news is that we have been tracking very carefully to the due dates on real estate, personal property tax, utility bills, and matching them with our critical date monitoring spreadsheet. And we will definitely not require any short-term borrowing or tax anticipation notes to cover any revenue shortfalls for the balance of FY20. That's the good news. And just as a reminder for citizens who may be listening, the council did adopt the temporary temporary provision, which allows for payments of taxes normally due May 1st to be extended a month. So the due date on real estate taxes without penalty and interest was yesterday. And also the deadline was extended and is now passed for the filing of exemptions or deferrals. But most importantly, I will point out, because I don't want people to get stuck in this trap, penalty and interest will begin to accrue, and if bills are not or will be completely due and payable on June 30th. So if you pay a bill prior to June 30th, you can avoid a headache. So pay the bill prior to June 30th to avoid the headaches. And then only finally on the FY21 budget, which isn't really bad news any worse than you can imagine, but it is less. I think we're on less solid footing in terms of the FY21 budget, but that was submitted for first reading at your last meeting, and is in the middle of discussions with the Budget and Finance Committee and the Finance Committee. Only we'll stress a couple things there. We still do not know what our local aid amounts will be. We are assuming local aid cuts of 10%. We also don't know, and the superintendent and the district does not know what their Chapter 70 school funding will look like. Chapter 70 is a very substantial part of their overall budget. So that's a tough one not to know. We did reach out. I reached out to DOR and DOR's position. Actually, I reached out to the Baker administration. The Baker administration's response was they were waiting on the legislature to take up the state budget discussions and they would not, make any changes to what they had submitted. So they're expecting the legislature to come back and have those discussions and make those changes itself. So, but again, we haven't gotten any sense from the legislature about when they will take up the state's FY21 budget, which in turn informs us what our local aid numbers will be. Just a reminder that for this year, for FY21 coming up, for the FY21 budget, we'll be looking to offset the revenue loss with a stabilization fund transfer of about $1.5 million. That will keep us our headcount stable, and that'll keep us from having to do furloughs or layoffs in FY21. And I think has been mentioned before, that was the objective when we began our multi-year goal of making sure that our stabilization account was robustly funded. It is well funded, and that money is there, and it is available for the economic downturn. And we continue to watch the future as carefully as we can in that regard. And so as such, we're beginning to be more concerned with FY22, but that will have a lot of eyes. The revenues that we earn in FY21 will probably well inform us about what our FY22 budget will look like. So we'll pick one headache at a time and move forward. Anybody that wants to see the budget packet in its entirety, it is on both the council webpage and the town manager webpage as well. So people are free to take a look at that. So happy to answer any questions about that.
Anybody have any questions regarding COVID-19 and budget impact? Just one comment that I have, and that is on the budget. I've heard, I don't know if you've heard, Mike, that if there is another round of stimulus money coming from the federal government, they want to include something for local cities and towns because they understand the revenue losses that we're gonna have. So that's something to keep an eye on. Secondly is, yeah, I don't know when the state's gonna, talk about the budget, but just remember that the 10% cut in the FY21 budget is based on fiscal 21 revenue, not what the governor proposed in January. The 10% cut is based on fiscal 20 numbers. So that we have done. So we'll see what happens there. Any other questions regarding the budget or COVID-19? We'll move on to CARES Act grant funding. How's Plymouth County doing with that?
So far, so good. We've submitted, or we're about to submit our first request for reimbursement under the CARES Act, and we will do that before June 12th, and that will get us a reimbursement prior to the end of the fiscal year so that we won't have cash flow issues in terms of our free cash certification later in the year. They're on about a 2-week submission schedule. So every 2 weeks, you can submit additional reimbursement requests. We're pretty confident that everything that we will be submitting will be reimbursed. We've been very careful to reach out to both the county and the state to make sure that the things that we think are reimbursable are in fact reimbursable, and we've gotten good feedback there. We're also doing prepping for FEMA reimbursement. FEMA reimbursement, as FEMA will tell you, comes first. So even though we get to apply for CARES Act funding June 12th, and the FEMA reimbursement comes somewhat after that, and then doesn't actually get processed and then returned to us for a good eight months to a year, if not more. FEMA's reimbursement for eligible expenses comes first, and we will make sure that obviously we will apply for what's reimbursable under FEMA. What's reimbursable under FEMA is less, amounts to less than is reimbursable under the CARES Act. So there's a little bit of a balancing act there, but I think the finance department has that well under control. And that is, I think that's essentially what I have for CARES Act.
Any questions from anybody regarding the CARES Act? Councilor George?
Thank you, Mr. President. Through you to the town manager. So, Mr. Dutton, has the Plymouth County given any indication on when two things, when they expect to go through the funds? And then the second question is, what happens if at some point if they have a deadline, there are funds left? Where does that go? Any idea?
Well, we'll make sure that there are no funds left. No, any funds
would
that are
hope.
not expended actually go back to the federal government.
Okay.
So and just in terms of process, so Plymouth County has roughly $90 million that it is now responsible for dispersing. It's taken 25% of that money, so in the $23 million range, and allocated that. They haven't given it, but they've allocated it according to population of all their all their member cities and towns. And so I believe that meant about $1.2 million to $1.3 million for us. So we draw against that. And when, at first, I can tell you that when we really didn't a rough analysis, we thought, this is going to be plenty of money to reimburse our needs. But I can tell you that as we get deeper and deeper and deeper into the expenses that we have, what's an eligible expense and what's not, I don't think the $90 million is going to be too much. I gotta put it that way. So their process, I think your question was about the process that they are using.
The more around the deadline. Is there a deadline to submit?
So they've given us a table that shows about 5 dates out into the future. There was a deadline, I believe it was May 28th. And then there's a June 12th deadline. And then after that, a June 27, every 2 weeks, there's another deadline. And that's for the initial round. So we're in good shape in that regard. The funding itself is designed to be there for us to draw off of until the end of December. So we've got, unless something changes and they extend that or they provide additional funding, we won't know at this point, but we know that funding is intended to last Plymouth County cities and towns through the end of December.
Great, thank you.
Anything else on the COVID CARES Act? Moving on, the next 2 items, I asked for these to get an update on where we are with the compensation survey study. That we approved this in February of 2019, Mike. I just wanted to know where we are with that.
We contracted with a company, a consulting company that whose business was to do this, and they got underway. And honestly, we have put the brakes on it because of what we know will be the difficulty in collecting data in this environment. So I don't know if everybody knows, but a really good compensation study really depends on the participation of your comparable cities and towns. So we've picked out almost 20 comparables, and so those, when you do these studies, the consultant will go out, or we will go out and try to get all of the data, the classification data, the salary data, the experience data, the benefits data, the all of it. And then that all goes in to the consultant to do their analysis. So one of the things that is a killer is when you only have one or two towns giving you the information for say a particular position. And if that's the case, the analysis suffers for lack of data. I mean, you've got a position for which you only have a couple of data points that is not going to be trusted by us or by the employee or the bargaining unit. So a good classification and compensation survey really requires multiple data sets. And we know we're not going to get good data right now because of what's been going on. So we've delayed it, and our expectation is to get right back at it when we know that we can get the data that we desperately need. So that's where we stand right now. And as I say, that could change. If for some reason all of a sudden we get right back into it and right back up and going, and then we'll be right back into it. But for now, at least we've put the brakes on it.
Right, I thought the initial main part that was needed to be looked at was the fire department, because of some of the changes through their contract and so forth. They weren't really part, as they are or were then, part of the study. So it was important to include the revisions in the fire department steps and so forth in the wage package. All right, well, I just thought after a year and a half, we'd be somewhere, but we'll see where it goes. Anybody else have any questions regarding that? The next one is the marketing consultant. That one we approved July of 2020, $60,000.
That one is actually going very well. We have, the circumstances over the last 3 months have sort of put a hold on that, but we anticipate picking right up. We have been in contact with them over this crisis, I'll call it. But we do expect to get right back at that within the next couple of weeks. We've been discussing with them a number of items. So they've offered some advice on keeping businesses afloat and as well as business recruitment strategies, and we'll take off as soon as this thing is over. We've also actually got a lot of significant amount of data from them to use in our financial modeling, and we're doing that because we are preparing to market the opportunity zone and also make more improvements to our bond rating. So we've interacted with them a significant amount. A lot of what we need to do now is interact directly with businesses and make sure that they know that that's a resource for them. But given it was a useless endeavor during the past 2-3 months. So, but we're getting right back on the horse and getting ready to go as soon as retail prohibitions and restrictions are lifted completely.
Thank you. Anybody have any questions regarding that update? items for our next meeting. If you have anything Councilor Fitzgibbons?
Sure. I know we've talked about a couple times, and Mr. Ivaldi brought it up earlier in citizens' comments about getting better answers from citizens' comments. And I'd hope we'd work out a process by now. It doesn't seem like we have. So I'm just going to suggest one that the town manager and the council clerk try to work on. And if there's vehement objections, we can make it an order or whatever and have a debate about it. But we had 3 folks stand up virtually tonight in citizens' comments at the beginning. Mr. Baumgarten, who, invited us all, informed us about his group's efforts on behalf of anti-racism activities, et cetera, which are all laudable, of course, and inviting us to come out this weekend to stand with them. There was no follow-up item other than our own individual selves deciding if we have, the availability to get there this weekend to do it. Mr. Ivaldi brought up a question that I believe had been asked to the council, not to the town manager, a couple weeks ago. And so to me, it would fall on the president to decide whether or not or how to answer. If the president of the council could do that at the next meeting or not, that's certainly, his prerogative. We had Mr. Clancy come up, and I apologize, Mr. Clancy, for cutting off the dialogue because I know it's important to, get information. But we had him come up with a very specific question that, I think Mr. Dutton gave his email, townmanager@bridgewaterma.org, and Mr. George gave his email that hopefully Mr. Clancy can find his answer before we meet again. I would hope he could find it no later than tomorrow. And so what I'd like to see, this is all in a lead up to what at the next meeting, the town manager would report on the 3 comments we had, that he had no follow-up from Mr. Baumgarten, no follow-up from Mr. Ivaldi, and Mr. Clancy's issue had been taken care of and solved via an email. So that's kind of my vision of it. Whatever happens, at the close of the meeting, if folks want to comment and there are new issues, again, follow the same procedure so that we're closing loops and not leaving people hanging for a long time. Just my thought. I just wanted to throw it out there. Thank you.
I hear what you're saying. I'm just going to comment quickly because I don't think that we should be adding, 300 different items to the agenda. I think questions that come up during citizens open forum or citizens comments that we don't engage in, well, perhaps we should start engaging if that's the way we're going to do it. But I don't think that's the right thing to do because it would extend our meetings a lot. I taken the opportunity, if I can, to reach out to those that have addressed questions after the meeting. I'll send an email or something. I would think that there would be follow-up with the town manager or us with the constituent after the meeting to address their issue. That's how I think it should be handled. It should be handled, okay, we hear you. We don't want to engage in a dialogue with you. We're not going to put it on the next agenda. We'll try to resolve your question between now and then. That's how I look at it. But I'll put it on for the next agenda because we're already, I'll put it on the agenda for discussion on how we want to go forward. But I believe the best way to handle this is for the question to be answered after the meeting, outside the meeting, by the town manager to the constituent or by us to the constituent. That's how
I'm just saying, Mr. Gallagher, that's a perfectly legitimate way to think about it. And, maybe if we put it on for a discussion and then decide if we need to have some type of formal document that says what we want to do or not, then that's fine. I'm amenable to that. I just want to, not leave someone hanging if they feel like they've come here and not gotten an answer. That's all. Thank you.
Any other comments regarding that? I heard a bell go off anyway. So if anybody has, and that will be on the agenda for discussion at our next meeting. So any other items you want the town manager to report on the next meeting, reach out to him between now and the next time the agenda is going to be put out, and it'll be on there. Again, we have a 3-week break after tonight, so. No discussion items, no committee reports, legislation for action, order FY 20056, affix the town clerk's salary at their meeting held on 5/26/20. The finance committee voted 5-0 to recommend approval. The budget and finance committee voted 3-0 to recommend approval at their meeting held on 5/26/20. This measure may be finally considered this evening. Is there I'll entertain a motion to approve.
So moved.
There's a motion to approve and there's a second. Any discussion?
I'd just like to say, I believe this is consistent with other department heads increases this coming year. So I think it's appropriate that we do that for the town clerk. As an elected position, we have to be the ones to set that salary. Thanks.
Correct. This does require a roll call vote.
Mr. Fitzgibbons,
Yes.
Mr. Columbotus. Hello, Mr. Columbotus?
Yes.
Thank you. Mrs. Loesch?
Yes.
Thank you. Mr. Rushton?
Yes.
Mr. Gallagher?
Yes.
Mr. George?
Yes.
Mr. Lindy?
Yes.
Mr. Chase?
Yes.
Mr. Souza?
yes,
9 in favor, none against.
Next order, so it passed. Order FY 20057, Town Council acceptance of electronic signatures by municipal boards recording standards. The Rules and Procedure Committee met on June 1st and will provide their disposition to the council this evening. This measure may be finally considered this evening pending a committee disposition. I'll refer to the Rules and Procedures Committee for their vote. Discussion.
Yes.
Councilor George?
Mr. President, so we had our meeting last night and this was approved 2-0.
Excellent. I'll entertain a motion to approve the order.
So
Motion
moved.
to approve.
The motion and there's a
Sorry.
second. Any discussion? Seeing none, this does require a roll call vote.
Hold on.
Oh, is there a hand up?
You got
Mr.
Mr.
Lindy.
Lindy,
Yep.
sorry. Yep. Go ahead,
Yes,
Councilor.
my question is this, thank you, to the chair. Is this a permanent change or is this just for now with the COVID?
It's a change that's offered through the current registries of deed during the state of emergency. So the electronic signatures that you'll be providing on documents that will need to be recorded, which is what this is relevant to, will not be accepted once the state of emergency is over. But statutorily, it does allow for them in certain contexts, and that's what you're voting on tonight.
Okay, thank you.
Does require a roll call vote.
Mr. Souza?
yes,
Mr. Chase?
Yes.
Mr. Lindy?
Yes,
Mr. George?
Yes.
Mr. Gallagher?
Yes.
Mr. Rushton?
Yes.
Mrs. Loesch?
Yes.
Mr. Columbotus?
Yes.
Mr. Fitzgibbons?
Yes.
9 in favor, none against.
And if I may on that one, the
Yes,
follow-up that needs to occur now relative to that vote is if Dennis is going to be signing it, he just needs to reach out to me so that I can notarize his signature. And then it needs to go from me notarizing Dennis's signature on that to the town clerk for her to affix her signature in the town seal before I record it at the registry of deeds. I can send you an email, Ann, as well, but I just want Dennis to be aware that I need him to reach out to me to notarize his signature.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you for the update. Old business, none, new business. We have order FY 20058, FY 20 year-end transfers submitted by the town manager. You have those in your packet,
No.
huh? They're in your packet.
Motion to refer to the Budget and Finance committees.
There's a motion to refer to the Budget and Finance Committee. Is there a second?
Second.
Okay. Does require a roll call vote. Any discussion on these, or these are, I've looked through them, these are pretty routine ones that we have every year. Council Fitzgibbons?
I was just going to say, do we want the town manager to explain it now or later? It doesn't really matter to me.
Well, I'm sure we're gonna hear it later, so. I see
Okay.
later.
In the back from the committee.
Mr. President?
Who's, Councilor George?
Yeah, just point of clarification on order FY 2059. It says fiscal year 20, end of year transfer, Old Scotland Links Golf Course, but there is a transfer to the transfer station within the order. Does that need to be changed before it goes?
I can answer that. It should be changed. It's just the title, but in terms of in the name of making it extremely transparent, that yes, it should be transfers among enterprise funds, not just the Old Scotland Links.
Are we on 59 or 58?
I'm looking at 59, Tim.
Can we vote on 58 first, or did we do that? Did I miss
I
something?
thought you did both.
No, we didn't vote yet. We didn't vote
Oh.
on 58 yet. I thought your
Yeah,
question was,
my apologies. My apologies. I jumped ahead.
any other questions on FY 20058? No, so this does require a roll call vote.
Mr. Fitzgibbons,
Yes.
Mr. Columbotus, Mr. Columbotus, you're muted.
Yes.
Thank you. Mrs. Loesch,
Yes.
Mr. Rushton,
Yes.
Mr. Gallagher,
Yes,
Mr. George,
Yes.
Mr. Lindy,
Yes.
Mr. Chase,
Yes.
Mr. Souza.
Yes.
9 in favor, none against.
next order is FY 20059, FY 20 year-end transfer, Old Scotland Links Golf Course. I'll entertain a motion to refer to committee.
So moved to Budget and Finance.
There's a motion and there's a second to refer it out to committee. Any discussion? Seeing none, that does require a roll call vote.
Mr. Souza,
Yes.
Mr. Chase,
Yes.
Mr. Lindy,
Yes.
Mr. George,
Yes.
Mr. Gallagher,
Yes,
Mr. Rushton,
Yes.
Mrs. Loesch,
Yes.
Mr. Columbotus,
Yes.
Mr. Fitzgibbons.
Yes.
9 in favor, none against.
okay, we'll see that back here in a couple weeks. The next item is FY 20060, acceptance of a gift, a park. No, a Parks and Recreation, from the Parks and Recreation, a gift of $500.
Motion to refer to the Budget and Finance committees.
Second.
The motion to refer it out in a second. Any discussion? This does require a roll call vote.
Mr. Fitzgibbons,
Yes.
Mr. Columbotus,
No.
no, okay. Mrs. Loesch,
Yes.
Mr. Rushton,
Yes.
Mr. Gallagher,
Yes,
Mr. George,
Yes.
Mr. Lindy,
Yes.
Mr. Chase,
Yes.
Mr. Souza.
Yes.
8 in favor, 1 against.
okay, we'll see that back here in a couple weeks. FY 20061, abate local meals tax from March 1, 2020 to June 30, 2020, sponsored by Councilors Fitzgibbons and Rushton. Entertain a motion to refer it out. Mr. Fit,
I'll make
So
the
moved.
motion. I'll second it for discussion.
there's a motion to refer it, and there's a second for discussion. Counselor Fitzgibbons.
Yeah, I wanted to introduce the idea. Councilor Rushton and I talked about it a little bit. I don't want to speak for him, but I have no pride around what we actually do other than to try to encourage local small businesses. So let's refer it to a committee. Let's get the town attorney to look at it and make sure everything's good and we do what we can to support local businesses. Thanks.
Counselor George, then I'll go to Counselor Rushton. Yeah. Sorry.
Okay. Thank you. So, I appreciate Council Fitzgibbons and Rushton bringing this on. I think it's a great idea. What I'd like, if this is appropriate, to offer a friendly amendment to this particular order, adding, and I'm going to paraphrase, that the town also will waive local meals tax for July, August, and September of 2020. I'd like to have the consideration because I appreciate not only do we want to help the businesses through what they've already experienced, but I also think that if we can get a local waiver for 3 months, we can really use this as a springboard to advertise, promote, to Bridgewater, to area towns that, we as a town are doing something I'll call over and above, for the lack of a better term, to help kickstart restaurants that have really taken a beating since the COVID crisis has started. I know that other towns are starting to think outside of the box in regards to accommodations for other establishments. One town's going to open up a portion of their main area for outdoor seating. I know other towns are looking at it in respect to opening up some additional avenues to accommodate the outdoor seating. But I think if we're able to start this in July for the waiver and go through September, it'll give the restaurants a couple things. One, it'll give them enough time to be able to work through the new norm around the requirements of the seating capacity, things of that nature. But it also give the town and hopefully our community economic development director the ability to reach out to the area businesses and really develop a plan to maximize exposure through social media, through print media, through radio media, TV media. Again, is another step for a local town to try to help small businesses, and restaurants, I think, are really one of the true definitions of a small business.
John,
To get people out.
John, can we get it? Let's get a second on that here before we get into discussion. I appreciate
Okay.
you elaborating on doing it. Do we have a second on the amendment?
Mr. Gallagher.
Yeah.
Councilor Rushton would second that.
Okay, so we got a second. Now, Sean, I'm sorry to cut you off. I just wanted a second so we could get discussion going, right?
No, okay, now that was my offer and my explanation. I'd love feedback.
Okay, Councilor Rushton, do you have any?
Sure.
Yep.
Absolutely. And I think that the presentation of this order and the last one that was presented, I was extremely pleased to hear the town manager talking tonight about working with local businesses. They're the lifeblood of our community. And I really think that this is yet another example of the town council trying to support small business in town and do what we can. We cannot afford to see any of our local restaurants close due to COVID, and many of them are on the brink. And this is one order. Now, it's out of the box. It's unique. I love the idea, and I love Councilor George's amendment, and I support that. Anything we can do to help the businesses, we need to be proactive in thinking outside of the box. And so I hope to get other support. I hope to get it into a debate, a conversation about the legalities, and hopefully something comes out that we're able to do something either as proposed or something very similar.
Thank you. Councilor Chase.
Thank you, Mr. President. I guess I would just like to say that I've given consideration to this order, this proposed order, for a couple of days. And I have to agree, of course, that the impact of the pandemic on local businesses and restaurants in particular has been severe, and many are in dire circumstances. And that'll certainly continue because even after the opening of restaurants, they'll be working under reduced capacity. I understand that, and much as some of you, I'm sure, I've been trying on a number of occasions. I've had takeout orders from local restaurants just to try to help to do my part personally to maintain the business. And I really hesitate to rain on the parade at this point. But frankly, I think we're going to learn. I just don't want false hopes to be raised. And I think we're going to learn that there are some legal impediments. Specifically and most notably, there's a general prohibition against the use of public money for private purposes. And in Massachusetts, that's largely embodied in Chapter 40, Mass General Laws. And that's really what this amounts to. In other words, we've spoken about this as a waiver and as a rebate or an abatement or a refund. None of those words apply because the meals tax is obviously mandated by state law. And when a restaurant collects meals tax, they do so as a fiduciary on behalf of the Commonwealth. And they hold that fund, that money, and they turn it over to the Department of Revenue. I think they do that quarterly. But they hold that money basically in escrow because they didn't pay that money. Meals taxes come from individual customers such as you and I. We pay that tax to the business. It's simply held by the business in trust, really. Now, for us to give a portion of money to the restaurants to help defray their expenditures during this troubling time really constitutes a gift of public money, taxpayer money, to private business. And I just want to say that much. That's largely my opinion, but that's my understanding. And I think that we were going to need to rely very heavily on guidance from town council at the appropriate time, because again, while this is a wonderful concept, it's certainly laudable. It's absolutely, I would like to see that it could be done, but I have serious reservations, and I hate to be the one to say that, but again, at the risk of raising what I suspect might lead to false hopes, I think we have to be very cautious about it. Thank you.
All right, I'll go to Councilor Columbotus, then Councilor Lindy.
Yeah, I kind of consistent with Mr. Chase's point. I just would like some clarification on this. So restaurants will continue to collect the meals tax, but then essentially be able to keep it? Is that how this legislation would work?
My understanding of this is that the way it's written now we're talking about the amendment. The discussion right now is on the amendment. The amendment is to include the months of July, August, and September in this. So my understanding is the local meals tax from March to today, and the town manager can confirm this. None of that has been sent to the town as of yet. The businesses, under the direction of the governor, has been told to hold those state taxes. So we haven't received any meals tax for the period in question, unless March 15th was the beginning. I don't know. Am I correct, Mr. Dutton?
No, I think you're correct.
Okay.
So
Can I speak on my amendment?
Can I?
Do you want to speak on the amendment, Mr. Columbotus?
Well, I'd like clarification on the root order, which is, I think we need to do that first. My question essentially is, to whom will these taxes be refunded or rebated?
I'm a little confused. Are we discussing the amendment or are we discussing the original
Right.
order?
We'll have that discussion in a minute, Mr. Columbotus, but the amendment right now is to include July, August, and September in this order. That's the amendment
Does it-
right now.
I would just assert that we need to know the definition of who they're being amended if we're gonna extend it for 3 months. That the amendment builds on the order
Then
itself.
we'll have a discussion on the main motion, which would certainly include the question you're asking. Mr. Lindy, do you have a comment about the amendment? You're muted. You're muted. There you go.
Yep, sorry about that. On the amendment only, I strongly support it.
Counselor George, did you have a follow-up?
I did. So to Councilor Columbotus's, for the amendment, is I would approach this the same way as when we have tax-free weekend, where the restaurants would not be collecting the local meals tax, just like we have retailers not collecting sales tax, so that their customers would not be paying that for 3 months. That's from my amendment though, Mr. Columbotus. So mine, the state's done it in practice, I would assume, but would have to get clarification in committee if we would be able to do it in regards to the 3-month waiver.
If you guys want, before we get to the main part, obviously I can answer the question about waiving prospectively. So essentially, what you have to do is actually rescind Mass General Law 64L, which is what you've adopted to adopt the local option meals tax, which is, I believe, 0.75%. And Mr. Chase is right. It's actually paid for by the consumer, not the restaurant. So you would have to rescind your adoption of that Mass General Laws for whatever amount of time. You can rescind it indefinitely, and then you can adopt it again at a later time. But that's the proper procedure to do what you're talking about, Mr. George.
Okay,
Thank
now
you.
does that require a public hearing and an advertising, Mr. Rollins, or?
No, I think you can rescind a local adoption without a full public hearing. Yep. That I'm not speaking to the underlying issue at all, but I'm talking about the amendment as we're on the amendment. So if you're rescinding a local option that you had excuse me, can you still hear me? I just broke
Yeah.
up.
Yeah, no, I can hear
That
you.
you had previously adopted, you can do that without a full public hearing. Yes.
But that's not on the agenda tonight, am I correct?
Correct. Well,
Right.
you don't have, you're looking to amend, I suppose, whatever's in front of us. I think a more proper way to do this would be to bring forward new legislation that rescinds Mass General Law 64L. That's the proper procedure.
Okay, and
Yep.
and the time, I'm just looking at the timing of this, because I believe to start this July 1st, I'm looking at the timing of all this. So we don't need a public hearing. We can't vote on it on our first reading.
Right.
So right now, the earliest we could really do this would be July 6th or 7th, whenever that first July meeting is, unless we called another meeting.
Correct. And you also need to know if you re-adopt it at a later date, it actually doesn't go into effect under Mass General Laws Chapter 64L for an additional 30 days from the day you adopt it. So that process may carry on longer than you anticipate as well. So I don't know if you do intend on rescinding this local meals tax for some time, you may want to be thinking in the future ahead of time when you may want to adopt it again, if at all.
But can we vote to rescind it retrospectively?
No.
Okay. Okay. All
No.
right, who's got their hand up? I think if we're gonna have to adopt this, we're gonna need to call another meeting. Counselor George, did you have your hand up?
No.
Who else has a question? No.
Actually, so I do. So to the town attorney, should I withdraw? Does it cause a problem, my amendment as constructed right now? Should I withdraw it and submit it for new legislation, or can it stay as an amendment to the current order?
I would withdraw it, and I would submit new legislation that specifically rescinds Mass General Laws, Chapter 64L. Yep.
Okay,
And we-
I
so
can help you.
Well,
I can help you with that language, but that's
when-
what you have to do.
when would that take place? Would we have to have a date certain on the legislation? Or does it have to wait 30 days to become effective?
No,
How does it?
not for rescinding. So
Okay.
if you rescind the local meals option, that can become effective immediately. The statute contemplates if you accept the local meals option, that it taking 30 days from that date to become effective. And I think that's for the sake of the restaurants, because what they end up having to do is actually some sort of recalculation on the way they charge for their meals. So they want to give them some advance notice, I suspect, which is why it's written that way. But I don't see anything in the statute that says on the date you guys rescind it, other than under our own charter, which we'd have to look into if this would apply because it's an order and not an ordinance, if there would be any delay. But I can look into that. But it would not be a 30-day delay as contemplated under the statute.
And is there anything that we can do under the current intent of what's in front of us?
Well,
You know,
I agree largely with what Mr. Chase has said. I think you're running into a litany of issues when you talk about refunding or rebating under Mass General Laws, Chapter 40. I think you're also running into problems under the anti-aid amendment to the Massachusetts Constitution when you start doing that and giving to certain private businesses over others. In reality, the consumer has paid this tax. The business hasn't paid this tax. It's paid directly by the consumer.
Right.
So you're giving private funds to businesses. The only way you could even conceivably think about that would be through a special act of the state legislature that you all brought forward. But I think that would be highly unlikely to succeed. And I think that to do this in this way is just not possible, unfortunately.
so what Counselor George is suggesting makes more sense.
I believe so.
Okay.
Yes. Yep.
Counselor Rushton, did you have a question?
Yeah, I just wanted to add, certainly myself and Councilor Fitzgibbons, this sort of spirited discussion around what we can do to help support local businesses is really the true intent of this proposal. So, working with him, we can look to, come back with a new order that makes sense. Obviously, we're going to run into some logistical issues with the proposal that's on the table, but ultimately, the goal here is if we come to some sort of conclusion about what can help local businesses, this seems like a great idea. And I don't necessarily think that we even have to talk about an end date in a new proposal at this point. And let's see, if in fact it has an impact positively on local business, particularly our restaurants.
Right, but in order to do anything, someone's got to introduce legislation to rescind Mass General Laws. So that's what's got to be done. And we don't meet for 3 weeks. So I love meetings. So if anybody wants to, I can certainly schedule a meeting for 2 weeks from tonight, or we could meet the week after the 23rd. Because I think the point, correct me if I'm wrong, Councilor George, the summer is here and the July 4th weekend, we really would like to, I think he would like to see this in place for July 4th weekend.
Yeah, I would like to give everyone that's involved in this, the restaurants, the town, the ability to plan, maximize the opportunity. So yes, and I'm willing to withdraw my amendment with the understanding that I'll work with the town attorney to bring legislation to the council for consideration to make the waiver a reality if approved.
Is there a second to withdraw that? There's a second by Council Lind. Okay, so that.
Well, Mr. Rushton probably needs to withdraw his second at that point, right?
Oh, Mr. Rushton, sorry. You want to withdraw?
Yeah, I withdraw the second to Councilor George's amendment.
Okay, so the amendment's been withdrawn. Councilor George will write up an order to rescind the actual Mass General Law, whatever the number was. So now we're back to the main order. I guess we can't do anything with this.
Well,
No.
let's just, I'd then make a motion to just table it indefinitely if we're not gonna bother to take action on it, and just take up whether we have a special meeting in a week or two, or take it up at our next regularly scheduled meeting, whatever we come up with. But the point was to start the discussion about it, which I think we've done. So thank you very much. Appreciate that.
Okay, so there's a motion to table this. Is there a second?
Second,
There's a second to table it. Does this
and I
require
have
a
a
roll?
question too.
Okay, and there's a discussion. Mr. Lindy.
So my question is, meetings 3 weeks from now, is there any reason that we can't meet the week before?
We're going to talk about that as soon as we take this vote.
Okay,
Okay. Does this require a roll call vote?
Yes.
Yeah. This is
Mr.
to rescind.
Souza. Sorry.
Yes.
Mr. Souza,
Yes.
Mr. Chase,
Yes.
Mr. Lindy,
yes,
Mr. George,
Yes.
Mr. Gallagher,
Yes.
Mr. Rushton,
Yes.
Mrs. Loesch,
Yes.
Mr. Columbotus,
Yes.
Mr. Fitzgibbons.
Yes.
9 in favor, none against.
Okay, so now I would propose that we either meet, we could probably do it on the 23rd, but would have to meet on the 30th because we can't vote anything in on its first reading. So it doesn't need to go to the, well, does it need to go to Budget and Finance Committee? Probably. So we're cutting it tight. So I'm open to meeting the 16th, the 23rd, and or the 30th in order to get this in place by the 4th of July weekend. Doesn't have to be, it'd be nice.
Council
Yeah, go
President.
ahead, Council Lindy.
So my question is there any reason we can't move our meeting up from the 23rd to the week before and address this and other business? And then if we
Well,
need
no, because
another meeting,
I believe we have a public hearing on the budget that night, so we can't
okay,
mess with that.
okay.
Councilor Loesch, did you have a question?
Is there any objection to having it the 9th?
No?
Nope.
Nope.
That would be my suggestion.
Okay.
Mr. Rollins, we're gonna have to sharpen our pencils pretty darn quickly.
I'm used to that.
Thank you, Councilor Loesch.
As always.
Does anyone have a problem with meeting a week from tonight at 7 PM via the Zoom web portal? Seeing none, so I don't think I need to take a vote on that. We'll just have a meeting June 9th at 7 PM. We got plenty of time to post it. And we can put on other stuff. We don't have to, it doesn't have to be exclusive to this one issue. We can get some other, whatever business. But we're
Has to
gonna
be
have.
has to be in by tomorrow, though.
Well, we have a joint meeting, Councilors Fitzgibbons and George. We have a joint meeting that night with the Finance Committee on the budget, the 9th. That's right. Now what do we do?
Well,
Oh,
can we move it? Can we have it on the 10th? We don't have to have it on a Tuesday.
no,
So I would ask to schedule the meeting on the 10th.
I'm sorry about that, Council Loesch. The Budget and Finance Committee have a joint meeting that night on the budget, the 9th.
I have a question.
And we were meeting off council nights because Monday nights, a lot of the Finance Committee members are on the school committee. Council Loesch?
Just a question, and sorry for my head till I have an ear infection and I'm just currently taking my drops because I'm the only adult that still gets ear infections. So in regards to that, if you're meeting that night and we're going to refer it to your committee, does it make sense for us to meet prior to your meeting and have it be part of your agenda so we can continue the conversation?
So we can meet on the 8th.
I'm just trying to think if it's going to you and you're meeting after it, it's still going to slow us down.
Mr. Rollins,
Does this require a vote from the Finance Committee? Never mind the Budget and Finance Committee. Would the vote to repeal the local sales tax require a vote of recommendation from the finance committee?
Yes,
Yes, okay.
I believe it would.
that's
Okay.
part of the charter.
Yeah, okay. So,
So if we're only voting on this, and this is the only discussion, so to your last point about adding things, if we're talking about this, our meeting could very well be 15 minutes, and then you can move on to your budget and finance committee with this already on the agenda, because we would be submitting it already. And then you'd be able to have that discussion, and we would be able to potentially talk about it again in our next full council meeting with your disposition.
okay, if it's okay with everybody, I want to reach out through Ann, through the clerk for the finance committee, to see if we can move that joint meeting to 7:30 or earlier, like 6. So we'll keep our meeting at 7, but does anybody have a problem with meeting the 8th, 9th, or 10th? Because it could be one of those, depending on what I get. Huh?
Yeah.
8th, 9th, or 10th.
Mr. President, the other option is for us as a budget and finance committee to recess quickly from the joint meeting to attend the full council meeting, do what we need to do, and come back into session.
As long as we can get, as long as we can get our link to Zoom and don't have any problems, yeah, because we'd all be on the same Zoom platform, wouldn't we? We'd already all be here, right? There's no 2 Zoom programs, right?
I think it would be a different meeting though.
The meetings are scheduled separately with
Okay.
different
Separately.
links.
So I'd have to log out and log in and log out. We'll work it out. We will add another meeting in there. Be prepared for the 8th, 9th, or 10th for another council meeting. Hopefully I'll reach out to the finance committee to see what they want to do. We'll get it done. We'll have another meeting. Okay, so that ends that. I'll go on to citizens' comments. Are there any citizens online that would like to speak during the citizens? Go ahead.
Yeah, I have 2 citizens that I believe wish to speak. Mr. Akins, did you wish to, whoops. I believe Mr. Akins wanted to speak.
Sure.
Yeah, I just, can you hear me?
Yeah.
Yep.
Yeah, I have several things. First, when you guys voted to reduce the number of hours for the elections, I objected and I said that it would disenfranchise me because I work 10-hour days. Other people might also work 10-hour days, and to reduce it to less than your typical amount of hours is going to disenfranchise not just me, but other people as well. That has to be paramount. Now you talk about mail-in ballots. I don't trust it. I want to vote in person. I don't care about a virus or whatever. I want to vote in person. And with your voting, you quickly changed it. And now you're saying that you can't quickly unchange it, even though that everything is opening up. That I don't buy. It can be done. It should be done. It has to protect the rights of the voters. Second, I received notification about the town charter, and I've been vocal about the shenanigans that were that was happening with the town charter with certain councilmen. And I was notified on the 28th of April that I wasn't going to be part of that the town charter review committee because of my associate membership in the planning board. That's ridiculous. Whoever came up with that, shame on you. I would have easily dropped that to be on the town charter. I'm just tired of this crap. And then finally, the government shut down the restaurants. They were doing it to help prevent the spread of the virus. Effectively, the government took over their business by shutting them down. According to the acts of 1950, the government should compensate for them. So I don't buy this private funds nonsense. These restaurants deserve to have some type of compensation for the burden that the government put on them.
Is there anybody else that wishes to speak during the
Yes.
citizens' comments portion of our meeting?
Yep, I have one more. I'm gonna-
Sure.
Dr. Hunt.
Good evening. Thank you for the discussion on the abatement issue. I'd like to point out, I think the town manager said that next year's budget is going to be extremely tough. And while I laud the idea, the citizens pay the meal tax every time they buy meals. If you cut it off, you're cutting off your longer term ability to have revenue coming to the town. Who does that serve? I don't think that serves anyone, and particularly it disserves the town. Second point, there's another potential revenue source in town that I'd like to hear a discussion on, and that has to do with the fact that we have a solar field that we buy our energy from, electrical energy from. That field potentially right now, I haven't received the most recent updates, so I can't give you the actual numbers right now, but it's close or maybe slightly above the 100% that was contracted with. If it goes above 100%, the town can sell the credits and actually have a revenue stream. So that needs to be factored into the budget, and I would like to have that discussed at the next meeting. Lastly, there was a PowerPoint that was supposed to be presented 3 or 4 months ago under a mandated requirement from the administrative code that committees present to the town council. I'd like to see that reinstituted. Thank you and keep up the good work.
Anybody else wish to speak during the citizens' comments portion of our meeting? Seeing none, I'll go down the line for our council comments. I'll start with Councilor Fitzgibbons.
Sure. Again, thank you, President Gallagher, for running a good meeting on this. It's got to be real challenging to do, and
Not easy.
I don't envy. I don't envy
No more.
Center Square these days. And I also want to thank everybody who comes out and participates even remotely in these. You know, it's really great that we do get the participation we do. And that leads me to my final point that I'd like to ask us all to think about and the town manager to think about, which is as we move toward the end of June and possibly further loosening of restrictions on where and how people can gather, I'd really like to have our June 23rd meeting in a public space that people can be in and not do it on a Zoom call like this. And if perhaps we could work with the school district to use the high school auditorium so that people can be appropriately socially distanced, it would give more folks a chance to be able to weigh in on the budget. I don't know if it's possible, but if the town manager could just investigate that, I'd certainly appreciate it. Thank you.
Councilor Columbotus,
Nothing tonight, thanks.
Councilor Loesch,
Nothing tonight, thank you.
Councilor Rushton,
Nothing, thank you.
Councilor George.
Thank you, Mr. President. So I appreciate the comments in regards to the local meals tax. And I hope the people that are watching, people that are listening, is the proposal is going to go to the Budget and Finance Committee. And everyone on that committee, first and foremost, is going to say, and rightfully so, how does it impact our fiscal year budget, 2021-22? And maybe there are avenues that we can take proactively to try to mitigate the potential loss of revenue. And I don't know. I just want people to understand in these particular cases, we put proposals out there, but really the heavy lifting and the majority of the work is going to be in the committee. So that we go in with an expectation, but after the committee, it could stay the same. It could dramatically change. it actually could come back without a recommendation. So I think the whole idea that I believe Councilor Rushton brought up was we're throwing some things outside of the box. And for mine, I'm not looking at it as a waiver forever, but a specific period of time. I was looking primarily to hopefully cover the summer, but we'll have to see. But that's the intent. And I appreciate that everyone, on the council and out in public are really looking at different avenues to, I'll say, kickstart local businesses that have really taken a beating over this COVID crisis. So thank you.
Okay, thank you. Councilor Lindy.
I just wanted to applaud Bridgewater citizens for civility and respect, and the young people that held 2 different peaceful protests here in town. It shows what Bridgewater citizens are made of. And I agree also with Mr. Fitzgibbons on the June 23rd budget hearing. If there's any way possible to do that so we can social distance and let the citizens in, that would be great.
Councilor Chase.
Thank you, Mr. President. I hope to join with the Citizens for Civility on Saturday for the standout that Sam had described, and I would hope that others would consider doing so as well. I think that I've mentioned before, I think that that particular group, of which I'm not affiliated with, does tremendous work that really goes somewhat unseen, but they're absolutely very visible when they stand in Central Square and help to educate passersby about the important issues of the day concerning civility and respect. And that's all I have.
Councilor Souza.
Nothing this evening.
Just a couple notes before we end this evening, and I want to obviously congratulate and say thank you to those that have peacefully protested in our community this past week. And I hope that our peaceful protests continue. We have a right to do that. The issue at hand is certainly a hot issue throughout our country. I think we should all be appalled at the violence that has taken place in parts of this country, although we all should recognize that there are peaceful protests going on as well. It's very troubling to me, and I'm sure to all of you, what's behind all this and how and where this is all going to go. But for our citizens to be out there, young, old, working, retired, whatever, to be out there is certainly shows that we have a very strong community. As far as the meals tax rescind votes for next week, I think that Councilor Fitzgibbons and Councilor Rushton brought up something very, very good. And I'm glad we had a deeper discussion about this. Just for informational purposes, in the fiscal 21 revenue, the town finance director has plugged in $90,000 for a full year of meals tax. Now, he cut that down considerably based on his projections, based on what's happening. So if you take $90,000 and divide it by 12 months, and then multiply it by 3 months that we're proposing, the maximum we would lose in revenue would be $22,500 based on his projection. So that's a sum of money, but it's peanuts when you put it against a $60 million budget if we go forward with this. So that's just where we are with the revenue side of what we're projected to lose. And that doesn't mean we won't make more than $90,000 if restaurants can open, and we bring this back after September. The Charter Review Committee is off and running. I went to I got them off last week for their first meeting. And tonight we appointed the final 2 members of that committee. So they now have a full complement, a full committee. And there's some new people in town that have stepped up to serve in that committee. And I think we have a very good group of citizens. ready, willing, and able to look at our charter and see what they can improve on. On that note, our next meeting will be soon. I'll let you know. I'll entertain a motion to adjourn.
So moved.
Second,
Motion is a second. Any discussion? That does require a roll call vote.
Mr. Fitzgibbons,
Yes.
Mr. Columbotus,
Yes.
Mrs. Loesch,
Yes.
Mr. Rushton,
Yes.
Mr. Gallagher,
Yes.
Mr. George,
Yes.
Mr. Lindy,
Yes.
Mr. Chase,
Yes.
Mr. Souza.
yes.
9 in favor, none against.
We are adjourned.
Good night, all.